Hello, in this video I'm going to introduce you to one of the databases that you can use to do the second assessment of your course, and this is the one where we're looking for evidence about how media culture works. And I want to introduce you to a particular archive called the TVNews archive, because it's a very rich resource that you can use to do research that's really quite interesting and will allow you to develop some new research skills. So what I would like you to have open is a blank NVivo document. I have an NVivo document here that I'm going to use for this, and I call it TVNews example. And then I'm going to show you first how to get into the TVNews archive. So the TVNews archive is a repository held at RMIT, and it contains free-to-air Australian news broadcasts and current affair programs. And it's a rich resource because I think in the future, when historians are going to ask, well, what did Australia think about a certain issue in the early 21st century? This is going to be one of the resources that they're going to use. So this is a resource that we can use to talk about how media created certain sorts of realities around media issues concerning young people. But that'll become clearer as we move along. So firstly, I'm going to show you how to get to the archive itself. So we have our Monash front page here. We go to library. We go to databases. We click on arts right here. We click on communication. And then down here at the bottom, TVNews. And here we are in the TVNews tab. So we're searching TVNews. And we want to find, let's click video only. Let's click advanced search. And today I want to talk about a few people have been doing projects that are either about the potential risks of social media or the social uses of social media. So projects that kind of straddle the harm and use topic. So let's see what happens if we just put in social media and young people. And suppose we want to say, we want to look at stories over the last 2 years. We click search and we see that we get 41 results. So one of the things we can do here is a number of really important things. The first thing we want to do is we want to make sure we go up to my search history and we hit save. You would enter your own email here go. It's going to bring you to that. Now, it's important to save things in that way, because what that means is every time you come back to this archive, you go to search history, you hit load, and you simply enter your email address, and it will bring you back to all of your saved searches. So we can do a couple of things here. The first thing I suppose we can see is that this will give you a sense of a range of really, really important pieces of information. This gives you a story, what it's about. It gives you the reporters. It gives you the source, and also when it was broadcast. And all of these pieces of information are really, really important. So what we see here is a collection of stories that tell us how Australian news has thematized stories about social media and the and young people over the last 2 years. So what could we do with this? Well, there's a variety of things we could do. So the first thing we can do is email ourselves all of these records. And then we see what we've got here is a brief, similarly to data from Communication and Mass Media Complete. We have all of our information about and a brief description of what the story is about. Now, I reckon what you should do is save all of that. I'm going to save this as a PDF. Actually, sorry, I can save it as a Word document. It's just as Then I'm going to put it into my en vivo document. So I'm going to go to data, to document, Dropbox, going to wait for that to download. Okay. Then what we're going to see here is we're going to be able to have a look over all of what all of these stories are about. This allows us to do a number of things. Suppose we were to think that the big question about social media is whether social media is a good or a bad thing for society, which is a huge simplification. But on a very broad level, one of the things we could do is we could go through and read each one of these synopses here and just code them as to whether each story is a good story or a bad story. So this first one, say we highlight that, doing this on a Mac again, and I want to code this, so I hit right click it, I code selection, add a new node, and I call this a good story. Done. Then down here, we have a story about Roxy Jakenko, and that is a bad story. And we'd kind of go on doing that. That's one of the things we could do. We're going to be working more on this in class, but one of the immediate things you can see is that you can kind of go through this and see ways of, for example, you could enumerate on balance whether over the last 2 years free-to-air stories about news and social media, have they been positive, have they been negative, but obviously more particularly what sort of patterns can we see in them. So that's probably the first thing that you can do, is you can go through this and begin to see, well, what sorts of things have Australian news television talked about. But there's far more you can do than that. Of course, the most important thing is that you can actually download the complete video record and put it into social media and put it into en vivo as well. So suppose, for example, you simply wanted to look at all of the positive stories about, you could look at all the positive stories about social media, or you could particularly just pick out the ones that talk about a significant threat, okay? So what we would do is we might pick out these stories. This is a great example, this one here. Okay, so we might actually start to look at some of these. And then what we can do is we can actually put some of these stories into in vivo itself as well. Say we pick this one. Authorities have appealed to young thrill seekers not to copycat people seen on social media throwing themselves off North Head. So this is an absolutely fantastic story, because this represents a story that talks about the idea that one of the risks of media is that they can cause antisocial or dangerous behaviour. And one of the things that you'll know in a couple of weeks is there are all kinds of complicated reasons why we have to be very careful about making a direct connection between media content and behaviour. But suppose we wanted to look at something like this in a little bit more depth. The first thing we can do is we can watch the entire video. But I'm just going to pause this for right now, because what I'm also going to do is I'm going to save it. I'm going to open it. I'm going to save it again. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back into NVivo. I'm going to go to data. I'm going to hit videos. There it is. This is going to take a while, it being a video. So, now we have this video in NVivo. And what we can do is, firstly, we can watch the whole thing. But then after that,
authorities have appealed to young thrill seekers not to copycat people seen on social media throwing themselves off North Head. They're tied to ropes with suspect anchors, risking certain death if they crash onto the rocks 100 metres below.
Climbers call this place The Fear. Sheer cliffs 100 metres high at Sydney's North Head, but it plays centre stage in an act of extreme recklessness.
Go, Chad. 3, 2.
A rope swinger dangles above the drop, then plunges 70 metres in free fall before the rope hurtles him across the cliff face underneath an overhang, before returning in a dangerous pendulum, swinging backwards and forwards.
It's frightening. Yeah, so much can go wrong. And if it does, as I said, it'll be catastrophic.
It's illegal, but this is a popular rock climbing site, rated medium difficulty. It's hard to prevent, but police say it's not the experienced, well-equipped thrill seekers they're really worried about. It's the amateur copycats.
These people are skilled. They make it look easy on the video, but I can assure you it's an extremely dangerous location.
Risks obvious to anybody.
It's very, very, very dumb.
Emergency crews cost money, police, ambulance, and just calling them out for, to save idiots from doing stupid things.
Police and rescue crews were there today, closing the area, looking for anchor points left in the rock. Not just swinging on a rope, even being a spectator is dangerous on rock edges considered unstable in strong, unpredictable winds. It doesn't stop the audience getting close. Just last month, at a nearby spot, an experienced British base jumper fell to his death taking photos. National Parks is now appealing for information to identify rope swingers. They're risking a fine of $300. Chris Marr, 7.
Okay, so one of the things that you can see that you can do with that is, well, one of the things I'm going to show you, is that you can actually analyze that by transcribing it. So you go back to the beginning. You go to the top right hand corner, hit edit. Slow things down to about here, or maybe even here. Start playing.
Authorities have appealed to young thrill seekers not to...
And you can begin to add in your transcript. You can add in the speaker over here. You can add that in from the record that you had earlier on. So on and so forth, and produce a transcript of this particular news article. You can also note down where the public are involved, when the public say things. You can note down who the experts are. And when you approach all of this, you actually begin to see a really interesting twist on the media effects debate, because one of the things that we can see here is that the story is not so much about the appeal of copycat sort of behavior, as in the social cost of that behavior and the social appeal. The thing that I find particularly interesting about this story is forever we've been talking about kids doing dumb things after seeing people doing dumb things on TV. But now it has a different dynamic to it, and it has a different kind of logic to it. So one of the reasons why we might think that there's perhaps something a bit more to these sorts of concerns is because they're not really about the psychological dynamics that either do or do not cause people to imitate what they see on screen. And we're going to be talking about those dynamics in, and I've written about those dynamics in the media effects chapter of the book, so you should read about that. But actually what this is about is how these dangers are a risk because of the social and media infrastructure of tourism, where we have two things. We have the practice of taking selfies in tourist spots, and that's become a part of the tourist spectacle, exacerbated by by a certain kind of genre of risk-taking via social media. So it isn't just sort of individuals doing things, it's a whole media genre. And the problems that that causes for the emergency services. So we're talking about of the risks of this sort of behaviour as something that's driven by a particular political economy, a particular organisation of media industries, as it relates also to the social infrastructure. So this story is worth looking at because it presents a different view of the problems of kind of copycat behaviour. And what you can do is you can add in, if we go back to our list, what you can do is you can go through and you can look for stories which are likely to say interesting things about how Australian media has covered the risks and benefits of social media. As I said, one of the things you can do is you can go in and look at all the positive, negative stories, look at all the negative media stories, compare the two. The other thing is that all of these, many of these stories also have named journalists, and the journalists will frequently advertise their Twitter handles in their reports. So why not go ahead and see if you can contact the reporters about these news stories and ask them things like, when they were preparing for the news story, what sorts of ideas did they source? How did they research the story? Who were the people they reached out to for expert opinion? Why did they reach out to those people? Can you find any particular patterns in regard to that? So I suppose one of the examples is if we look, for example, at this News 8 jihadi law internet ban, about the state government doing things against radicalisation. One of the names here is Greg Barton. Greg Barton was a professor at Monash, is now a professor at Deakin, and he crops up really quite frequently in news stories about media, and news stories about social media and terror. So you could reach out to him and maybe see if he would talk to you about his views on how media could cover the issues of social media and the threat of radicalisation, for example. So what I'm trying to say is that this particular archive, that's just a little introduction to the archive and some of the things that you can do with it. But it provides a way of, you can do three things. You can sort of download synopses of these stories and kind of see if you can identify any particular patterns in relation to the synopsis you've got. You can go a little deeper into particular stories that catch your interest. You can download them, you can put the videos in to NVivo, you can transcribe them, you can think about the images, you can even contact some of the people who are involved to get their perspective on that particular story. So what this really does is, the reason why I'm using this particular archive for your research is it really provides you with a range of sort of sources and evidence that you can use to do your own analysis on how media culture works. So have a think about, and maybe what you want to do is go in and do your own searches using your own search terms to see if you can find anything interesting that you can pursue in regard to the topic of either harm, celebrity, or media users. Okay, so that's just a little example of how you can use the TV News archive.